Today we're going to continue on our 2019 offseason plan series, and we're going to discuss the Detroit Red Wings, and that's coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. If you're new to this series, we basically break this down into 3 segments. The first one, we take a look back at their 18-19 season, take a look at some key team and individual player statistics, as well as any significant changes that happened to the team throughout the year. Secondly, we're going to take a look at their salary cap situation, any pending RFAs, UFAs, and see how they can handle any pending contracts this summer. And then thirdly, we're going to discuss any potential changes through trades, free agency, or whatnot that they need to make this summer to look ahead and get better for next year. So let's get started here with the 18-19 season recap. So the Detroit Red Wings finished with a record of 32-40-10 for 74 points, 7th place in the Atlantic Division. Unfortunately missing the playoffs here yet again. Unfortunately, since their 25-year run came to an end, they've been out of the playoffs here the past couple of years, but certainly going through a rebuild, and things do seem to be on a pretty good pace here. They have a lot of good prospects in their system. So overall, though, it was not a bad year, considering where things are at in Detroit, in my opinion. But let's take a look at some of their key team statistics, including special teams and goals for, goals against. The power play was not overly spectacular, but it was slightly below average at 18.1%. The penalty kill was not great as well. 28th best in the NHL, 77.1%. So certainly special teams are an area that both sides could stand to improve upon. Goals for, they scored 227 goals for 22nd best, and goals against they allowed 277 for 27th best. Now let's take a quick look at some key individual statistics, including their top starting goaltender and some of their top individual player performances. Jimmy Howard remains to be the starting goaltender in Detroit, at least for the short term. This past year, he finished with a 23-22-5 record, a 3.07 goals against average, and a .909 save percentage. Even though those numbers don't sound overly awesome, he did have a pretty solid year. Obviously, the team in front of him was not the best. Lots of young players going through some growing pains, and really, I do think he played better than those numbers indicate. So overall, I do like the fact that they were able to retain him, since they don't have another goalie in their organization who's really able to take on that starting job here just yet. Taking a look at their top scorers, they were led by Dylan Larkin, who in my opinion likely will become their future captain. Larkin had 73 points last year. Secondly, they had Andreas Athanasiou score 30 goals and put up 54 points, so he certainly took a big step forward in his goal production. Anthony Mantha had another solid year, 25 goals and 48 points. And Tyler Bertuzzi, who's slowly become a pretty solid member of that team's core, has put up 47 points last year here as well. Now let's take a look at some of the key changes this team went through during the past year. There were certainly some pretty significant moves. At the NHL Trade Deadline, they traded longtime Red Wing Gus Nyquist over to the San Jose Sharks, and they also traded defenseman Nick Jensen to the Washington Capitals, both receiving draft picks in return. So obviously kind of stockpiling the picks and moving on some guys here out of the organization. Of course, they also signed a couple of college free agents who do look to be pretty decent prospects and hopefully work out for them long term. Of course, they signed Ryan Kuffner and Taro Hirose. So they both had a chance to get in some action here at the end of the season. Didn't look too bad. So we'll see how things go with them. Certainly some low risk moves, but with some potential high rewards. Of course, at the end of the year, we found out that Ken Holland was being promoted to the president type of role, and the new general manager was going to be Steve Yzerman, returning to Detroit. It seems as though they made it sound like Holland was graciously stepping aside and was all for Yzerman coming back. It wasn't long after, though, that we found out Holland still had that burning desire to be a GM and end up leaving the organization to go take the GM job in Edmonton. So obviously Yzerman will be in great shape. They also brought in Pat Verbeek as well to be an assistant, who should work out well. Somebody who Yzerman's quite familiar with and has worked a lot with here in the past. But obviously the biggest thing that happened to this organization in a long time is Stevie Y coming home to be the new GM. Now let's take a look here at their contract situation for next year, including any UFAs, RFAs, and their salary cap situation to handle it. They don't have a whole lot of contracts expiring this year. They do have one RFA in Martin Frk. It's debatable whether or not he's qualified and retained. He didn't really see a ton of action last year. He's kind of been up and down, so it's debatable what they do there. But either way, not a huge decision for them to have a major impact either way. UFA-wise, they do have some veterans that I know was leaning towards the fact that Holland might bring back, but Yzerman might have a different opinion here, and the players themselves may or may not decide to continue playing as well, including longtime defenseman Nick Kronwall, forward Thomas Vanek, and defenseman Luke Witkowski. So debatable. We could see all these four guys either all return or not return at all. It's really debatable how they go about handling it. They're not major pieces of the puzzle here anymore for Detroit moving forward. For the most part, I'd say they're likely not returning. They're going to go with younger forwards and younger defensemen here to give them more of a chance to play here and develop, would be my guess. For next year in the salary cap, they have 18 players under contract for $71.1 million tied up in cap space. That should give them somewhere between 10 to 11 million, depending on the exact number that the salary cap finishes with for next year. So they do have some flexibility there for sure, but not a ton of room. Thirdly here, let's take a look at what moves new GM Steve Yzerman needs to make to continue making this team better. Now, they do have a lot of good-looking prospects in the Red Wings organization, including some guys they drafted last year, including Philip Zadina and Joe Veleno. They also have defenseman Jarek McIsaac as well. They had a really good draft last year here, in my opinion. They had a couple of players fall in their lap, which they did select. They have another high pick coming up the draft here again. So Detroit's going to have another opportunity here to add another top player from the 2019 crop, a great-looking prospect. Depending on how they feel about it, they might be able to grab a dynamic goal scorer like Cole Caulfield, who's obviously tearing it up with the United States national team program. They might be able to get themselves a big center iceman like Dylan Cousins, or a dynamic Russian forward like a Vasily Polikolzin, maybe a Kirby Dox. Hard to say how they go about this. Depends on who else is picked ahead of them before they have the opportunity here. But Detroit, either way, will likely get themselves a pretty solid prospect at that position. Obviously, Steve Yzerman is going to be looking to make his mark this summer. They certainly have some work to do. Longer term, they need to figure out a goaltending situation here. They have Jimmy Howard that they signed for an extension for another year. They still have Jonathan Bernier, but they really need to find that goaltender of the future. Not sure if that's going to happen for them this summer or not, but it's certainly a big question mark for them going forward. They have two aging netminders who, at this point in their careers, aren't really the greatest for starting goaltenders. Like I said, Jimmy Howard did an admirable job last year, given what he had to work with. But overall, they need to find that next guy to take over and really be the backbone of this team moving forward. Hard to say how they go about doing that, but it's certainly going to be a big priority for sure. Next up, the Red Wings need to try to rid themselves of some bad contracts. Unfortunately, Ken Holland, he overall, in the grand scheme of things, during his time as GM with Detroit, the whole scope, did a pretty good job. But lately, he did give out some contracts I thought were not the greatest. Certainly too much term, too much money to some players that they did have success with, but certainly not justified here anymore. So Yzerman's going to have to try to do what he can to move some of that off the books, especially, it's the same kind of situation Ken Holland's getting himself into in Edmonton. They have their share of bad contracts as well. So hard to say how he goes about it. We could see some buyouts. We could see some trades with retained salary. Not going to be the easiest thing to do for sure, but certainly going to be interesting to see how Yzerman feels about some of those veteran guys that are on longer term deals, kind of making too much money and having too much term. So not an easy task, but certainly something he needs to address. I also would not be surprised to see Yzerman be one of those teams who possibly might haul out the offer sheet this summer. I can see them making either an offer sheet or a potential trade proposal here to bring in a pretty decent RFA. I know the one that comes to mind the most, being the biggest link to the Red Wings, would be Jacob Trouba of the Winnipeg Jets. I'm not sure if he's going to go down the offer sheet road just because he'd be giving up a lot of draft picks. He very well might be able to work out a pretty decent trade with Winnipeg instead of going down that route. But given the situation Detroit is in, I can see them considering that type of move for sure. Trouba has seemed unwilling to sign a long-term deal with Winnipeg. It's very likely he does get traded this year. I can see him being interested in going home to Michigan to play for the Red Wings. Of course, Winnipeg's going to get the best deal though for themselves, so not a given that they're going to try to move him to Detroit just to make him happy. They have much more say over the situation than he does. But at the same time, I can see the Red Wings being interested. He could be that top right shot defenseman that they need to add into their lineup. They do have a lot of prospects that would make it interesting to see what Winnipeg would want in return. So I can certainly see that being a move that Yzerman continues to look at. You can't help but wonder if he goes back to talk to his old team, the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are in a bit of a salary cap crunch as well, and maybe bringing in a player or two from that organization who he's quite familiar with and knows who can help the Red Wings here move everything along in this rebuild. Either way, it'll be very interesting to see how Yzerman makes his mark on this team this summer. There's lots of work to be done in Detroit, but the rebuild is going on a pretty decent direction. They've drafted well the last few years. He needs to continue that going while adding some other pieces to the mix to work on the long-term plan. Of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts and your opinions down below in the comment section. What moves do you think Steve Yzerman needs to start with here as the new GM of the Red Wings to really help this team move forward and be better for next season? If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe for more videos in this series. There's plenty more coming. If I haven't covered your team yet, they will be coming in the coming days and weeks. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.